The rain hadn't fallen in Dusty Creek, Arizona territory for 347 days, and Eliza Hartwell knew every single one of them by heart because the townspeople counted them aloud whenever she walked past. She hadn't asked to be different. She hadn't chosen to be born with eyes the color of storm clouds or hair so black it seemed to swallow light. She certainly hadn't requested the birthmark on her left shoulder blade that her deceased mother once said looked like a lightning bolt. But in the summer of 1881, when the wells ran dry and the cattle started dying, desperate people needed someone to blame, and Eliza fit their idea of a curse better than any drought pattern or shifting weather could explain. The trouble started in earnest on a Tuesday morning when she went to the general store for flour. Martha Henderson, the store owner's wife, had always been cordial enough, but that day her face twisted into something ugly when Eliza approached the counter. "We don't serve your kind here anymore," Martha said, her voice loud enough to carry through the entire shop. "Not when you're the reason our crops are dying." Eliza felt her throat tighten. "Mrs. Henderson, I haven't done anything. I'm just trying to buy supplies like everyone else." "Your grandmother was a strange woman, and your mother was stranger still. Everyone knows women like you bring bad luck. My husband says we should have run you out of town months ago." Martha crossed her arms over her ample chest. "The rain stopped the week after your mother died. You inherited whatever darkness she carried." The accusation was absurd. Eliza's mother had died of pneumonia 14 months ago, and the drought had begun gradually, not suddenly. But facts didn't matter when fear took root in people's hearts. "That's not how weather works," Eliza said quietly, though she could feel the stares of the other customers burning into her back. "Please, I just need flour and coffee. I have money." "Money from a witch is cursed money." Martha turned her back. "Get out of my store." Eliza left without the supplies she needed, her face burning with humiliation. She'd lived in Dusty Creek her entire 22 years. She'd attended the same schoolhouse as everyone else, sung in the same church choir, helped nurse people through the influenza outbreak 2 winters ago. None of that mattered now. She was halfway back to her small homestead on the edge of town when she heard the horse approaching. She didn't turn around, didn't want to see which neighbor had decided to hurl more accusations her way. But the rider moved past her and then turned, blocking her path. Eliza looked up and found herself staring at Caleb Morrison, one of the ranch hands from the Double Bar M spread about 5 miles north of town. She'd seen him around, of course. Dusty Creek wasn't big enough to not notice a man like Caleb. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and hair the color of wheat. His eyes were a startling blue, like the sky used to look before the dust took over. He was probably about 25, she guessed, and had a reputation for being fair-minded and hard-working. "Miss Hartwell," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was deep and steady. "I saw what happened at the store. That wasn't right." Eliza blinked in surprise. "You were there." "I was outside, loading supplies onto my horse, heard the whole thing through the window." He dismounted in one smooth motion and stood a respectful distance away. "Martha Henderson should be ashamed of herself. You didn't do anything to cause this drought. Try telling that to the rest of the town." Eliza hated how bitter she sounded, but she was tired, so desperately tired. "They've made up their minds." Caleb frowned, his jaw tightening. "Then their minds are wrong. I've worked cattle and land for 10 years now, and I've seen droughts before. They're part of the natural cycle out here. Blaming a person for the weather is ignorant superstition, nothing more." Something warm unfurled in Eliza's chest, something she hadn't felt in months. Hope, maybe, or just gratitude that someone finally saw her as human rather than as a scapegoat. "Thank you for saying that, even if you're the only one who believes it. I'm not much for following the crowd when the crowd is acting foolish." He glanced back toward town, then at her empty hands. "You didn't get your supplies. What did you need?" "Flour and coffee, but I can manage without them for now." She had a small vegetable garden that she'd been nursing with precious water from her well, which somehow hadn't run completely dry yet. That fact alone had made some people more suspicious of her. Caleb walked back to his horse and untied one of the bags from his saddle. He returned and held it out to her. "Take this, I bought extra." "I can't take your supplies," Eliza protested, even as her stomach growled at the thought of real coffee again. "You can and you will. Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better. You can pay me back when this nonsense blows over." His smile was gentle, and it transformed his whole face from merely handsome to something that made her heart skip. Eliza accepted the bag, her fingers briefly brushing his. Even through her gloves, she felt the warmth of his skin, the calluses that spoke of hard work. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison." "Truly, Caleb," he corrected. "And it's no trouble at all, Miss Hartwell." "Eliza," she said softly. If he was going to show her kindness in a town that had turned its back on her, the least she could do was let him use her given name. They stood there for a moment, the dusty road stretching out behind them, the merciless sun beating down from a cloudless sky. Eliza found herself noticing details about him: the small scar above his left eyebrow, the laugh lines around his eyes, the way he held himself with quiet confidence rather than swagger. "I should let you get home," Caleb said finally, though he didn't sound particularly eager to leave. "But if you need anything else, or if anyone bothers you again, you can send word to the Double Bar M. I'll help however I can." "Why?" The question escaped before Eliza could stop it. "Why are you being kind to me when everyone else has decided I'm responsible for their suffering?" Caleb's expression grew serious. "Because I was raised to judge people by their actions, not by rumors or fear, and because what's happening to you isn't right. Someone needs to stand up and say so." He mounted his horse with easy grace and tipped his hat to her once more before riding away. Eliza watched him go, clutching the bag of supplies to her chest, and feeling something she hadn't felt in a very long time: a connection to another human being. That feeling lasted until she returned home and found the word which painted across her front door in crude red letters. The next few weeks were harder than anything Eliza had endured. Her chickens disappeared one night, probably stolen or killed. Someone poisoned her vegetable garden, leaving the plants withered and brown. She found dead crows nailed to her fence posts, their glassy eyes staring accusingly. The message was clear. Leave or worse would follow. She might have done it, might have packed up and headed east to start over somewhere else, if not for Caleb. He started riding by her property regularly, always with some excuse. He was checking the boundary lines, or he'd seen smoke and wanted to make sure everything was all right, or he'd brought extra vegetables from the ranch's root cellar. They began talking, tentatively at first, then with growing ease. Eliza learned that Caleb had come to Arizona from Missouri after his parents died of scarlet fever when he was 16. He'd worked his way up from a stable boy to a trusted ranch hand through sheer determination and skill. He loved the open spaces of the territory, the way the land stretched endlessly under vast skies. He read books whenever he could get his hands on them, teaching himself about everything from astronomy to ancient history. In turn, Eliza told him about her mother, a gentlewoman who'd taught her about herbs and healing. Her mother had been widowed young when Eliza's father died in a mining accident, and she'd raised Eliza alone, supporting them both by serving as the town's unofficial midwife and healer. People had respected her mother's knowledge, had come to her when they were sick or injured. But after her death, that respect had curdled into suspicion, especially when the drought worsened. "She would tell me that fear makes people cruel," Eliza said one evening as they sat on her porch steps, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple. "I never fully understood what she meant until now." Caleb sat close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Fear is a powerful thing. But so is courage. You're braver than most people in that town, staying here when they've given you every reason to leave." "Sometimes I think staying is just stubbornness, not bravery," Eliza admitted. She'd grown comfortable with Caleb over the past weeks, comfortable enough to voice her doubts. This is my home. Why should I be the one to leave? You shouldn't. His voice was firm. You have every right to be here. Eliza turned to look at him, really look at him. The fading light softened his features, made his blue eyes seem darker. She'd been trying not to acknowledge the growing feelings she had for him, the way her heart lifted whenever she saw him riding up the path, the way she caught herself thinking about him when she should be focused on other things. It was foolish to care for someone when her life was in such chaos. It was dangerous to let herself hope for something as normal as affection, maybe even love. But Caleb was looking at her with such warmth, such genuine care, that Eliza felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "You've been very kind to me," she said quietly. "Kinder than I deserve." "You deserve a lot more kindness than you've been getting." He reached out and gently tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for just a moment against her cheek. "Eliza, I hope you know that I don't come out here just because I think you're being treated unfairly. I come because I enjoy your company, because I think you're remarkable," her breath caught. "Caleb, you don't have to say anything," he continued. "I know the timing is terrible, I know you've got enough to worry about without me adding my feelings into the mix, but I wanted you to know. I wanted you to understand that someone sees your worth." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, healing tears. She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I see your worth too. You've been the only light in some very dark days." They sat like that as night fell, hands clasped, neither of them speaking because words suddenly seemed inadequate. Eliza felt something shift inside her, some fundamental change. She wasn't alone anymore. Whatever came next, she'd have Caleb beside her. What came next arrived 3 days later in the form of an angry mob. Eliza was hanging laundry when she heard them coming. At least 30 people, maybe more, carrying torches despite the fact that it was midday. She recognized most of them. Farmers whose crops had failed, ranchers whose cattle were dying, shopkeepers whose businesses were suffering. Normal people made desperate by circumstances beyond their control, and desperate people did terrible things. At the front of the group was Jacob Murphy, a cattle rancher who'd lost half his herd to the drought. His face was red with anger and exertion. "Eliza Hartwell," he bellowed, "come out here and face what you've done." Eliza's hands trembled as she set down the wet shirt she'd been hanging. She could run, maybe make it to her horse in the barn and flee before they reached her. But where would she go? How far would she get before they caught her? She stepped off her porch and stood in her yard, trying to appear calmer than she felt. "Mr. Murphy, everyone, what's this about?" "You know damn well what this is about," Murphy shouted. Several people in the crowd murmured their agreement. "The drought keeps getting worse. We've lost everything, our crops, our animals, our livelihoods. And you're the cause." "I'm not causing the drought," Eliza said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I'm suffering from it just like you are. My garden is dead, my well is nearly dry, I'm not a witch and I don't have any power over the weather." "Liar," a woman shrieked. It was Betsy Carmichael, whose husband had died of heat stroke 2 weeks ago while trying to dig a new well. "Your well hasn't gone dry like everyone else's. You're keeping the water for yourself with your dark magic." "My well is nearly empty," Eliza protested. "I've been rationing water just like everyone else. There's no magic involved." "Then how do you explain it?" Murphy demanded, taking a step closer. The crowd surged forward with him, a many-headed beast fueled by rage and fear. "Your mother was strange, everyone knows it. She knew things she shouldn't have known, could do things that weren't natural. She passed her evil to you." "My mother was a healer. She helped people." Eliza backed up toward her porch, her mind racing. There was no reasoning with this mob. They'd come here with violence in their hearts, and they wouldn't leave until they'd exacted some kind of terrible price. "She was a witch, and so are you." Murphy pulled out a length of rope, and Eliza's blood turned to ice. "We're going to put an end to this curse once and for all. When you're gone, the rains will come back, you'll see." "This is murder you're talking about," Eliza shouted, her voice breaking. I haven't done anything wrong. Please, you all know me. You've known me my whole life. We should have done this months ago," someone else called out. The crowd was getting closer, their faces twisted with an anger that had been building for too long. Then, like a miracle, Eliza heard the thunder of hooves. A rider came tearing down the road, his horse kicking up clouds of dust. Caleb pulled his mount to a sliding stop between Eliza and the mob, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "That's far enough," he said, his voice carrying across the yard with unmistakable authority. "Nobody's touching her." Murphy's eyes narrowed. "Morrison, this isn't your concern." "Get out of the way." "I'm making it my concern." Caleb didn't move, didn't back down even though he was one man against dozens. "You're about to do something you can't take back. You're about to murder an innocent woman based on nothing more than superstition and fear. She's cursed us." Betsy screamed. "She needs to pay." "She hasn't cursed anyone." Caleb's voice rose, commanding attention. "I've studied weather patterns and drought cycles. This is a natural phenomenon, not magic. The Southwest has had droughts before, and it will have them again. Killing Eliza won't bring rain. It'll just make all of you murderers." "How do you know she hasn't bewitched you?" someone shouted. "Maybe she's got you under her spell." Caleb's laugh was short and harsh. "I'm not bewitched, I'm just not ignorant. Any of you ever bother to look at actual evidence?" The drought extends for hundreds of miles in every direction. It's affecting towns that have never even heard of Eliza Hartwell. How exactly is she supposed to be controlling weather patterns across the entire territory? That seemed to give some people pause. Eliza could see a few faces in the crowd looking uncertain, though Murphy and his closest supporters still looked murderous. "The Cowboy's got a point," one of the farmers said slowly. "My brother over in Tucson says they haven't had rain there either. She can't be cursing places she's never been." "It's all connected," Murphy insisted, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. "She's the source of it." "Based on what?" Caleb demanded. "Based on the fact that her mother knew how to deliver babies and set broken bones. Based on the fact that Eliza has dark hair and unusual eyes." "That's not evidence, that's prejudice." He urged his horse forward a few steps, deliberately putting more distance between the crowd and Eliza. "I know you're all scared, I know you're suffering, we're all suffering. The double bar M has lost cattle too. But taking your fear out on an innocent woman won't solve anything. It'll just add more suffering to the world." "Why do you care so much about protecting her?" Murphy asked, his eyes suspicious. "What is she to you?" Caleb's shoulders squared. "She's someone who deserves to be treated with basic human decency. And if you must know, she's someone I care about, someone I'm not going to let you hurt." The declaration sent a murmur through the crowd. Eliza felt her heart swell even as fear still gripped her. Caleb was risking his own standing in the community for her, making himself a target alongside her. "You're a fool," Murphy spat. "When the crops don't come back, everyone will know you protected a witch." "If the crops don't come back, it'll be because we need to find better irrigation methods and dig deeper wells, not because of Eliza." Caleb's hand remained on his gun. "Now I suggest you all go home before this gets ugly. I'm a good shot and I'm not afraid to defend an innocent person." For a long moment, nobody moved. The standoff stretched taut as a wire, ready to snap at any second. Eliza held her breath, certain that violence was about to erupt, that Caleb's bravery was going to get him killed. Then, slowly, some of the people at the back of the crowd began to drift away. Then a few more. The farmers who'd seemed uncertain, some of the women who looked ashamed of what they'd almost participated in. Within minutes, the mob had shrunk by half. Murphy glared at the deserters, then turned his fury back to Caleb. "This isn't over. Next time you won't be here to protect her." "Then I'll make sure I'm always here," Caleb said calmly. "Go home, Murphy, take care of your ranch, let go of this foolish vendetta." Murphy spat in the dirt, made a gesture that might have been a curse or just an expression of disgust, and stalked away. The remaining members of the mob followed him, their torches suddenly looking absurd in the bright afternoon sunlight. When they were finally gone, Caleb dismounted and turned to Eliza. She was shaking, her legs barely able to hold her upright. Without a word, he closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms. Eliza collapsed against his chest, her carefully maintained composure shattering. Great, gasping sobs tore through her as all the fear and pain and loneliness of the past months came pouring out. Caleb held her tightly, one hand cradling the back of her head, murmuring soothing words she couldn't quite make out through her crying. "It's all right," he said when she'd finally quieted to sniffles. "You're safe, I've got you." "They were going to kill me," she whispered against his shirt. "If you hadn't come, but I did come, and I'm not going anywhere." He pulled back just enough to look down at her, his blue eyes fierce with emotion. "I meant what I said out there. I care about you, Eliza, more than care about you. I think I'm falling in love with you." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were different. These came from a place of wonder rather than fear. "I'm falling in love with you too. I have been for weeks now. I just didn't think I had any right to feel something so good when everything else was falling apart. You have every right to happiness." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "You have every right to be loved." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home. His lips were soft and warm, tasting faintly of coffee. Eliza wound her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the emotion she'd been holding inside. All the gratitude and affection and desperate hope that somehow they'd make it through this nightmare together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "You can't stay here alone. It's not safe." "I don't have anywhere else to go," Eliza said, though the thought of spending another night in her house, knowing that angry people might return at any moment, made her stomach churn. "Come to the Double Bar, M. Mr. Henderson, the ranch owner, is a decent man. Once I explain the situation, I'm sure he'll let you stay in one of the spare rooms in the main house. You'll be protected there. Won't that cause trouble for you? If people think you're harboring a witch, let them think what they want." Caleb's expression was determined. "I'm not going to let fear dictate my actions. Besides, half the men who work at the ranch are practical types. They won't buy into the superstition." Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she couldn't impose on his employer, that she'd already caused him enough trouble. But the truth was, she was terrified of staying in her house alone. The mob had dispersed for now, but Murphy's final words echoed in her mind. This wasn't over. "All right," she said quietly. "Let me gather some things." They packed quickly. Eliza took her clothes, her mother's journal full of herb remedies and medical knowledge, and the few pieces of jewelry she owned. Everything else, the furniture her father had made, the dishes her mother had collected, the quilts that had taken years to sew, had to be left behind. It felt like abandoning pieces of herself, but survival mattered more than possessions. The ride to the Double Bar M took about an hour. Eliza rode behind Caleb, her arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek pressed against his back. Despite everything, she felt safe with him, protected. The ranch was larger than she'd expected, with a sprawling main house, several barns, and numerous outbuildings. The land stretched out in all directions, brown and dusty from the drought but still beautiful in its own harsh way. As they approached, several ranch hands looked up from their work, their expressions curious but not hostile. Mr. Henderson was a grizzled man in his 60s with shrewd eyes and a weathered face. He listened to Caleb's explanation of the situation without interrupting, his expression giving nothing away. When Caleb finished, Henderson was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Miss Hartwell, you're welcome to stay here as long as you need. I don't hold with mob justice or superstition. A man judges cattle by their meat and weight, and people should be judged the same way, by their character and actions, not rumors." Relief flooded through Eliza. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I promise I won't be a burden. I can work to earn my keep." "I know herbs and healing, and I can cook and clean." Henderson held up a hand. "We'll figure out the details later. For now, get yourself settled. Maria, my housekeeper, will show you to a room." He turned to Caleb. You did the right thing, son. That girl needed help and you gave it to her. That's the mark of a good man. Over the following days, Eliza began to settle into life at the ranch. Maria, a kind Mexican woman in her 50s, welcomed her warmly and showed her the rhythms of the household. Eliza helped with cooking and cleaning, tended a small herb garden that Maria had been trying to keep alive, and even assisted when one of the ranch hands injured his hand in a fence-building accident. Her knowledge of healing, learned from her mother, impressed everyone who witnessed it. The ranch hands treated her with respect, some with outright friendliness. They were practical men who cared more about a person's usefulness than about rumors and superstition. When Eliza successfully treated a horse's infected hoof, preventing what could have been a fatal condition, she earned their gratitude and trust. Through it all, Caleb remained a constant presence. They stole moments together whenever they could. Conversations in the evening after work was done, rides out to check fence lines where they could talk privately, quiet dinners when the main house was empty. Their relationship deepened, moving beyond the initial attraction into something stronger and more substantial. One evening, about 3 weeks after Eliza had come to the ranch, Caleb took her to a spot on the property where a cluster of cottonwood trees grew around a nearly dry creek bed. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I used to come here when I first arrived at the ranch," Caleb said as they sat on a large rock overlooking the creek. "When I missed my parents and my old life in Missouri, this place always made me feel peaceful." Eliza leaned against his shoulder. "It's beautiful. Even in the drought, you can see how lovely it must be when the water flows." "Everything is more beautiful when you're here," Caleb said softly. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Eliza, I know we haven't known each other very long. I know the circumstances of our meeting were unusual, to say the least, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love your strength and your kindness. I love how you've endured terrible treatment but haven't let it make you bitter. I love the way you laugh and the way you see beauty in small things. I want to spend my life with you if you'll have me." Eliza's heart felt too big for her chest. "Caleb, are you asking? I'm asking you to marry me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple silver ring with a small turquoise stone. "It's not fancy. I've been saving my wages for a while now, and this was what I could afford. But if you say yes, I promise I'll spend every day trying to make you happy." Tears blurred Eliza's vision. "Yes. Yes, of course, yes." She laughed through her tears. "I love you too. I love how you see the good in people, how you stand up for what's right even when it's difficult. I love your humor and your intelligence and the way you make me feel safe. I never thought I'd find someone who truly understood me, but you do." Caleb slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he was kissing her again, and Eliza kissed him back with all the joy and love and hope surging through her. When they finally pulled apart, both smiling broadly, the world seemed brighter somehow, despite the drought and the troubles still facing them. "We should tell Mr. Henderson," Eliza said, admiring the ring on her finger. The turquoise caught the fading light, glowing like a piece of captured sky. "We will, but first let me just look at you, my fiancé." Caleb's smile was radiant. "I'm the luckiest man in the territory." "I'm pretty fortunate myself," Eliza said, happiness bubbling up inside her like a spring. They married a month later in a small ceremony at the ranch. Mr. Henderson gave his blessing and even offered them a small house on the property that had been sitting empty. Maria helped Eliza sew a simple but lovely dress from cream-colored fabric. A traveling preacher who was passing through the area performed the ceremony. The wedding was small. Just the ranch hands, Maria, Mr. Henderson, and a few people from town who'd maintained their friendship with Caleb and believed in Eliza's innocence. It wasn't the grand celebration Eliza might have once imagined for her wedding day, but it was perfect because it was real and filled with genuine love and support. When Caleb kissed her, as the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Eliza felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. All the pain and fear of the past month seemed distant, like a bad dream finally fading in the light of day. Their wedding night was tender and sweet. Caleb was gentle with her, patient as they learned each other's bodies as they expressed their love physically as well as emotionally. Afterwards, lying in their marriage bed in the little house that was now their home, Eliza felt more content than she ever had before. "I never thought I'd be this happy again," she whispered into the darkness. "Not after everything that happened." Caleb pulled her closer, her back against his chest, his arm draped protectively over her waist. "This is just the beginning. We're going to have a good life together, Eliza. I promise you that." The drought continued through the fall and into winter. The situation in Dusty Creek grew more desperate. Some families packed up and left, seeking better prospects elsewhere. Those who remained grew increasingly hostile, and although the mob didn't return to threaten Eliza directly, ugly rumors continued to circulate. Caleb heard them sometimes when he went into town for supplies. People muttered about how he'd been bewitched, how he'd betrayed his own kind by marrying a witch. A few former friends turned their backs on him. But Caleb never wavered, never showed doubt or regret. "They're afraid," he told Eliza one evening after a particularly unpleasant trip to town. "Fear makes people cruel and stupid, but eventually they'll realize the truth. The drought isn't your fault." "I hope you're right," Eliza said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Some prejudices ran too deep to be easily uprooted. The answer came in January of 1882, in an unexpected form. A government surveyor arrived in the area, sent by the territorial office to assess the drought situation and make recommendations for how communities could better manage water resources. His name was Thomas Whitmore, and he was a serious man in his 40s with years of experience studying weather patterns and land management across the West. Whitmore spent 2 weeks in the area, taking measurements, examining geological formations, and interviewing residents. When he presented his findings at a town meeting, Caleb made sure to attend, and he brought Eliza with him despite the hostile stares they received. "The drought affecting this region is part of a larger pattern impacting much of the Southwest," Whitmore explained, standing at the front of the church where the meeting was being held. "My research shows these cycles are natural and recurring. Based on tree ring data and historical records, this area experiences significant droughts approximately every 20 to 30 years. The current drought is severe, but it's not unprecedented, and it's certainly not caused by any individual person." "Then why isn't it raining?" someone called out. "There's got to be a reason." "There is a reason," Whitmore said patiently. "Shifting atmospheric patterns, changes in ocean temperatures, variations in the jet stream. These are complex meteorological phenomena that scientists are still working to understand fully. But I can tell you with absolute certainty that no human being has the power to control weather on this scale." He glanced at Eliza, and his expression was kind. "I understand there's been some unfortunate scapegoating in this community. That needs to stop. Blaming innocent people for natural disasters is not only morally wrong, it prevents communities from taking the practical steps needed to address the real problems." "What kind of steps?" Mr. Henderson asked from where he sat near the front. "Better water management, for one thing. Deeper wells. Irrigation systems that conserve water rather than wasting it. Drought-resistant crops, learning from the native peoples who have survived in this climate for generations." Whitmore pulled out a sheaf of papers. "I have recommendations here that could help this community not just survive the current drought, but thrive even in dry conditions." The meeting continued for another hour as Whitmore outlined his suggestions. Some people seemed genuinely interested, asking intelligent questions about implementation and costs. Others remained skeptical, though their skepticism was now directed at the surveyor's methods rather than at Eliza. As people filed out of the church, a few approached Eliza and Caleb. To Eliza's shock, Martha Henderson was among them. "Miss Hart, Mrs. Morrison," Martha corrected herself, her face flushed with embarrassment. I owe you an apology. I was cruel to you and I believed things about you that weren't true. I was scared and desperate, but that's no excuse. I'm truly sorry. Eliza was silent for a moment, remembering the humiliation of being thrown out of the general store, the fear of the mob, all the pain that had followed. Part of her wanted to hold onto her anger, to make Martha suffer the way she'd suffered. But a larger part of her, the part that sounded like her mother's gentle voice, knew that forgiveness was the only path forward. I accept your apology, Eliza said quietly. The drought made everyone afraid, I understand that. Other apologies followed. Not from everyone. Murphy and his closest supporters left without acknowledging Eliza at all. But enough people extended olive branches that Eliza felt some of the weight she'd been carrying begin to lift. As winter turned to spring, the community began implementing Whitmore's suggestions. Wells were dug deeper. Irrigation channels were constructed more efficiently. Farmers planted different crops, ones better suited to arid conditions. The work was hard and expensive, but it gave people something productive to focus on rather than their fears. And then, on a cool morning in early March, the rain finally came. Eliza woke to the sound of water pattering on the roof of their little house. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming, but Caleb was awake too, his eyes wide with wonder. Is that? Eliza started. Rain, Caleb finished, his voice full of awe. It's actually raining. They ran outside in their nightclothes, not caring who might see them. The rain was light but steady, soaking into the parched earth, dripping from the eaves, creating small puddles in the yard. All around the ranch, people were emerging from buildings, faces turned up to the sky, many crying with relief and joy. Eliza stood in the rain, arms outstretched, feeling the cool water on her skin. She was laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed with gratitude and relief. Caleb wrapped his arms around her from behind and they stood there together, letting the rain wash over them. It came back, Eliza whispered. The rain came back. Of course it did, Caleb said, pressing a kiss to her wet hair. Just like the surveyor said it would, it was never about you. It was just weather. The rain continued on and off for the next week. Not enough to immediately end the drought, but enough to green up the land, to fill the wells, to give people hope. Streams that had been dry for over a year began flowing again. Wildflowers burst into bloom across the desert, carpets of gold and purple and red. Life didn't immediately return to normal. Trust, once broken, took time to rebuild. Some people in town remained wary of Eliza, though most had moved past their superstitions. Eliza found she didn't particularly care about winning over those who'd been quickest to condemn her. She had a husband who loved her, a home, friends at the ranch, and work that gave her purpose. She began helping Maria with an expanded medicinal garden, growing herbs that she used to treat various ailments among the ranch hands and their families. Her reputation as a healer grew, and even some people from town began quietly asking for her help when they or their children fell ill. Eliza helped them all without judgment, remembering her mother's teachings that a healer served everyone, regardless of past wrongs. In the summer of 1882, Eliza discovered she was pregnant. The realization came one morning when she was helping Maria prepare breakfast and suddenly had to rush outside to be sick. Maria took one look at her pale face and a knowing smile spread across the housekeeper's face. "How far along do you think you are?" Maria asked. Eliza calculated quickly. "About 2 months, maybe," Maria's smile widened. "A baby, how wonderful. Have you told Caleb yet?" "You're the first to know," Eliza admitted. "I wanted to be sure before I said anything." She told Caleb that evening after dinner. They were sitting on the porch of their little house watching the sunset. The land was green now, transformed by the rain that had continued sporadically through the spring. Cattle grazed in the distance, healthy and fat. Everything felt peaceful and right. "Caleb," Eliza said, taking his hand. "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, his expression immediately concerned. "What is it? Is everything all right?" "Everything is wonderful," she smiled, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. We're going to have a baby, probably sometime in January." For a moment, Caleb just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a huge grin split his face. He let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to the main house and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "A baby," he kept saying. "We're having a baby, Eliza, that's incredible. I take it you're happy about this," she teased when he finally set her back on her feet. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her deeply. "You've made me the happiest man alive, again." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Eliza felt well most of the time, just tired and occasionally queasy. Maria fussed over her, making sure she ate enough and didn't work too hard. Caleb became adorably overprotective, trying to prevent her from doing anything strenuous. Eliza bore it with amused patience, knowing his concern came from love. As her belly grew, Eliza found herself thinking often about her mother, wishing she could be there to share this experience. Her mother would have been an excellent grandmother, full of wisdom and warmth. But in a way, Eliza felt her mother's presence in the knowledge she'd passed down, in the journal full of herbs and remedies that Eliza now consulted regularly. On a cold night in late January of 1883, Eliza went into labor. Maria and a midwife from a neighboring ranch attended her while Caleb paced outside, nearly wearing a hole in the porch. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. There were moments when Eliza wasn't sure she could continue, when the pain seemed too much to bear. But finally, as afternoon light slanted through the bedroom window, Eliza gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When Maria placed the squirming, crying infant on her chest, Eliza felt a love so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. This tiny person with his shock of dark hair and scrunched-up face was hers and Caleb's, a piece of their love made manifest. "Let me get the father," Maria said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "He's been nearly out of his mind with worry." Caleb burst into the room moments later, his face pale and anxious. But when he saw Eliza propped up in bed, tired but smiling, holding their son, his expression transformed into pure joy. "Meet your son," Eliza said softly as Caleb approached on shaking legs. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the baby in wonder. When Eliza carefully transferred the infant to his arms, Caleb looked terrified and awed in equal measure. "He's so small," he whispered. "He's perfect," Eliza corrected. "He looks like you," Caleb said, gently touching the baby's dark hair. "He's going to be handsome." They named him Samuel, after Caleb's father. Samuel Morrison grew quickly, a healthy, curious baby who rarely cried and seemed endlessly fascinated by the world around him. Watching Caleb with their son made Eliza fall in love with her husband all over again. He was a patient, loving father, singing to Samuel when he fussed, walking with him for hours when he wouldn't sleep, teaching him about horses and cattle as soon as Samuel was old enough to understand. The years that followed were good ones. The drought had broken fully and the land flourished. Cattle prices improved. New families moved to the area, and Dusty Creek slowly grew into a more prosperous town. Eliza's healing practice expanded, and she became known throughout the region for her knowledge of herbal medicine. The superstitions that had once nearly gotten her killed faded into embarrassing history, a shameful episode most people preferred to forget. Eliza and Caleb's family grew too. 2 years after Samuel's birth, Eliza gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. She had Caleb's blue eyes and fair hair, a sunny-tempered child who laughed easily. 3 years after that came another son, Daniel, who was quieter than his siblings but possessed a keen intelligence and gentle nature. Mr. Henderson grew older and eventually decided to sell the Double Bar M. By then, Caleb had saved enough money and had proven himself invaluable to the ranch's operations. Henderson sold him a substantial portion of the land at a generous price, allowing Caleb and Eliza to establish their own ranch. The Morrison Ranch started small, but it grew steadily. Caleb's fair treatment of his workers and his knowledge of cattle management made the operation successful. Eliza managed the household and continued her healing work, and between them, they built something substantial and lasting. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb took Eliza back to the spot near the cottonwood trees where he'd proposed. The creek was flowing now, a cheerful burble of water over rocks. The trees were full and green, providing dappled shade. "You remember the last time we were here?" Caleb asked, holding her hand as they sat on the same rock. "I remember everything about that day," Eliza said. "I remember thinking that despite all the terrible things that had happened, I'd found something precious, someone who saw me for who I really was." "I think we both found that," Caleb said. He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder just as she had so many years ago. "Sometimes I think about how differently things could have turned out if I hadn't been at the general store that day. If I'd been too afraid to stand up to the mob, if you'd left town before I could tell you how I felt. But none of those things happened," Eliza said softly. "You were there when I needed you. You were brave when others were cowardly. You chose love when others chose fear. That's what matters." From the house in the distance, they could hear their children playing. Samuel would be almost 11 now, probably organizing his younger siblings into some elaborate game. Rose's laughter carried on the breeze bright as bells. Daniel's quieter voice added a counterpoint. "We've built a good life," Caleb said. "We have," Eliza agreed. She turned to look at him, this man who'd changed everything for her, who'd stood between her and violence, who'd offered her not just protection but partnership and love. His hair had a few threads of gray now, and there were deeper lines around his eyes, but he was still the most handsome man she'd ever seen. "I love you," she said. "More now than ever if that's possible." "It's possible," Caleb said, smiling, "because I feel the same way. Every day with you is better than the last." He kissed her there by the creek, under the cottonwood trees, and Eliza felt the same flutter in her heart that she'd felt at 15, at 22, at every age in between. Some loves faded with time, but theirs had only grown stronger, deepened by shared struggles and shared joys, by the family they'd built and the life they'd created together. Years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. Samuel grew into a capable young man who worked the ranch alongside his father, learning the business with the same dedication Caleb had shown. Rose discovered a talent for horses, training them with patience and skill that amazed everyone who watched her work. Daniel, true to his nature, became fascinated with books and learning, and eventually went east to study agriculture and animal husbandry at a university, determined to bring modern scientific knowledge back to improve the ranch. Eliza's hair began to show silver, and Caleb's face grew more weathered, but they remained active and engaged with their work and their family. They became grandparents when Samuel married a kind schoolteacher from Tucson and had 2 daughters. Rose eventually married a neighboring rancher's son, a union that merged 2 properties and created lasting friendship between the families. Daniel returned from university with not just a degree but a wife, a smart woman who shared his love of learning and innovation. Through it all, Eliza and Caleb remained devoted to each other. They still took walks in the evening, still sat on their porch watching sunsets, still found reasons to laugh and reasons to hold each other close. The terrible days of the drought and the mob had faded into distant memory, a story they occasionally told their grandchildren as a lesson about courage and the dangers of prejudice. One evening, when they were both in their 60s, Caleb and Eliza sat together on their porch as they had thousands of times before. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and well-maintained. In the distance, they could see Samuel directing some work on one of the barns. Rose rode past on one of her horses, waving cheerfully. Daniel's children played in the yard, their laughter floating on the warm air. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if the drought had never happened?" Caleb asked. "If people had never turned against you?" Eliza considered the question. "I think about it sometimes," I probably would have stayed in my little house. Maybe married someone from town, someone ordinary who I liked well enough. I would have been content, probably, but I wouldn't have been this happy. I wouldn't have known what it was like to be truly, deeply loved. The drought was terrible, Caleb said slowly. So much suffering, so much loss, but it brought you to me. It showed me who you really were, your strength and grace under pressure. I'm not glad for the suffering, but I'm grateful for where it led us. Me too, Eliza said. She took his hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. His hands were more gnarled now, marked by decades of hard work, but they were still the hands that had offered her supplies when no one else would, that had held her through fear and joy, that had built the life they now shared. I wouldn't change a single thing, she continued. Not the fear, not the pain, not the uncertainty, because all of it led to this, to us, to our family, to a life that's been richer and fuller than I ever imagined possible. Caleb raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. I love you, Eliza Morrison. I've loved you from the moment I heard you standing up for yourself in that general store, refusing to be cowed by prejudice and fear. I'll love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Eliza said, her voice thick with emotion despite the many years they'd been together. My defender. My partner. My home. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, painting the sky with the same wild beauty that had marked every Arizona evening of their life together. Around them, the ranch bustled with life. Children and grandchildren, workers and animals, all the pieces of the world they'd built together. In the distance, thunder rumbled. Caleb and Eliza looked up to see dark clouds gathering on the horizon, promising rain. They smiled at each other, remembering that other rain so many years ago, the rain that had finally ended the drought and vindicated Eliza in the eyes of those who doubted her. Looks like we'll have good weather for the crops, Caleb observed. Good weather for everything, Eliza agreed. As the first drops began to fall, cool and sweet, they remained on the porch, watching the rain come in across their land. It fell on the house they'd built, on the barns and pastures, on the cottonwood trees by the creek, on the graves of those who'd come before and the cradles of those yet to be born. It fell like a blessing, like a promise, like proof that even the harshest drought eventually breaks, and that love can grow and flourish even in the most unlikely soil. The Morrison family thrived for generations after that, their story becoming part of the history of the land. And at the heart of that story, passed down from parent to child, was the tale of a woman blamed for a drought she couldn't control and a cowboy who defended her when the whole town raged. A story of courage and conviction, of standing up for what's right even when it's difficult, of love that transforms fear into hope. It was a story with a happy ending, the kind of ending that comes not from luck or chance, but from two people choosing each other again and again, through good times and bad, through drought and rain, through all the years of their long and beautiful life together.